Hey everyone, welcome back. So far in our program, we've learned about our classroom hatchery equipment, when and how we got our Atlantic salmon eggs, their life cycle, habitats, native range, when and how they arrived into Lake Ontario, their predators and prey, and lots of other cool things about Atlantic salmon. During the program, we have also heard that Atlantic salmon disappeared from Lake Ontario. A fish that for thousands of years was extremely abundant, meaning there were lots and lots of them. A fish that for thousands of years was an important food source for Indigenous people living around Lake Ontario. When European explorers and settlers first started to arrive into what is now called Southern Ontario, they were amazed by this abundance of Atlantic salmon, as well as other species of fish and wildlife. But life started to change for Atlantic salmon. By the late 1700s, people were noticing that there just weren't as many Atlantic salmon as there once were. Some efforts were made to try and save them, but sadly, by the late 1800s, Atlantic salmon were gone from Lake Ontario. Atlantic salmon were considered extirpated from Lake Ontario in 1898. Extirpated means that they're locally extinct. Extinct means that they no longer exist. Lake Ontario Atlantic salmon no longer exist. Atlantic salmon went from extremely abundant, so abundant that you could walk across rivers on their backs, so abundant that you might catch so many of them that your boat might break in half under the weight of them, to completely gone in 100 years. What happened? This week we're going to learn this tragic story with help from Mary Kate from the Toronto Zoo. But before we get into this sad tale, we're going to check on our hatcheries. Hatchery number 1. Filter, check. Air pump, check. And our temperature
is 3.5 degrees Celsius.
And hatchery number 2, the filter is working, the air pump is working, and our temperature is 8 degrees Celsius. Over the past 13 weeks, we've been watching the growth of the fish in our 2 different tanks, and it is quite noticeable that they're developing at different rates.
The fish in tank number 2 are swim-up fry, while the fish in tank number 1 are still very much alvin. The fish are the same age, and the equipment is the same in both hatcheries. The difference between the 2 hatcheries is the temperature. We've had an average temperature of 4 degrees in tank number 1 and 7 degrees in tank number 2. Tank 2 has been 3 degrees warmer than tank 1, and the fish in tank 2 hatched earlier and have grown much quicker than their cooler friends in tank 1. The temperature of the water has affected the metabolic rate, meaning the rate that the fish have turned food, in this case the yolks, into energy for things like growing, moving, and thinking.
The metabolic rate in ectotherms, which are cold-blooded animals like invertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, and fish, is largely determined by the temperature of their environment.
The water temperature has dictated how quickly our Atlantic salmon eggs developed into eyed eggs, when they hatched into alvin, and how quickly they are using up their yolk sacs. The warmer the water, the quicker the development.
Why don't we have the temperature even warmer and grow these fish even quicker? Well, these cold water fish can't survive in temperatures much higher than the temperature that we've been running tank 2.
If we ran the tanks at even a few degrees warmer, we might start to negatively affect the health of the fish and increase mortality. Cold and slow is the best way for these fish to grow.
Now that all of the fish have hatched, they can handle slightly warmer temperatures. If we think about the natural environment, the ice is melted, taking with it some of the darkness, and the water temperature is slowly rising. We will mimic these conditions on tank 2 by leaving the front panel off and slowly increase the amount of light with a lamp on a timer to mimic day and night cycles. And we will slowly increase the temperature up to 11 degrees Celsius.
This should get the fish to start feeding. I'll now turn it over to Mary Kate from the Toronto Zoo.
Hello, I'm Mary Kate. I'm the Great Lakes Program Coordinator here at the Toronto Zoo. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to be talking about our involvement in the Atlantic Salmon Restoration Program. And we're here in front of the Americas Pavilion. Because if you come to the zoo and you visit the Americas Pavilion, you can actually see some of our Atlantic salmon on exhibit. They're in our pond here with some other local species like sunfish and bass. So when we raise the Atlantic salmon here at the zoo, once they get big enough, we move them here to this building out of our fish lab. We move them here, it gives them more space. And we keep them here so that people can see them when they come visit and learn about the Atlantic Salmon Program and what we're doing to help protect this species. So we're going to visit two other spots here at the zoo today. We're going to go to our fish lab. You're going to see our Atlantic Salmon Hatchery in the fish lab. It's a lot like the Atlantic Salmon Hatchery at OFAH. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Atlantic salmon and why they went extinct in Lake Ontario, and a little bit more about what we're doing to protect them. And then we're going to visit our turtle room here at the zoo, and we're going to talk a little bit about another local species that the Toronto Zoo is working to help protect. So I look forward to seeing you at our next stop, the fish lab. Here we are in the zoo's fish lab. We have our two Atlantic salmon hatcheries right here beside me. So we have this bigger one here up at the top. We have about 100 Atlantic salmon in here, just growing and getting bigger. And then down here at this lower tank, we have about 200 in here. But it's easier to see the ones at the top, so I thought we'd start with this one. So just like the hatchery at OFAH that Ben has talked about, we have the same thing here. So this water is about 6 degrees, pretty cold for our salmon because that's what they like. And maybe we can get a shot of them. They're hard to see, but there are some in the corner there. So these Atlantic salmon are coming along really well in their development. Their yolk sac is almost gone now at this point. So it won't be too long before they're ready to feed. But of course they are still very difficult to see down here in our tank. They blend in so well, and they're busy hiding because in nature they would be hiding from predators. They of course don't know that they're in an aquarium, so they are still doing their thing and trying to keep out of sight. So they will not be much bigger than this when we release them into the wild. I have one here, a little model. This is a 3D printed model. So they might be about this big, and they might be considered fry when we release them, but they might be a little bit smaller, somewhere around this size. Definitely not any bigger. So the Toronto Zoo has been involved in the Lake Ontario Atlantic Salmon Restoration Program since about 2008, so over 10 years now. That we've been doing this, and we've been raising salmon in classrooms with students and also raising salmon here at the Toronto Zoo and releasing them into the wild. So we really like doing this program and being able to talk to students and members of the public about Atlantic salmon, the story of the Atlantic salmon and their history in Lake Ontario. So Atlantic salmon actually went extinct from Lake Ontario in 1898, so well over 100 years ago, and then when they go extinct from a specific area, in this case Lake Ontario, we call that extirpated. So that means that they're no longer found in one place, but they are found in another place. So there are Atlantic salmon in the Atlantic Ocean, and there are Atlantic salmon in Lake Ontario now, thanks to the restoration efforts, which are still ongoing, and we're still working on restoring that species, but the original genetic line of Atlantic salmon is considered to be extinct. Now, like I said, this happened well over 100 years ago, and there are 4 reasons for why this happened. And the first one has to do with deforestation. So well over 100 years ago, before there were cities, before there were lots of people living in big areas here around Lake Ontario, people started to come here, settlers from Europe came, and they started to change the landscape. So they started cutting down trees to create fields. They started cutting down trees near rivers and waterways. And doing that really impacted the waterways. So that's one thing that happened. Another thing that happened was overfishing. So of course when the settlers arrived, there was lots of Atlantic salmon, and that was a really great food source. And it also became a commercial fishery. So they were able to catch lots of Atlantic salmon and sell them and help build the economy doing that. The problem was they just did too much of it, so they overfished that population. Another reason is pollution. So at the same time these cities were building and growing, the water was becoming polluted, and it was just not good enough quality for the Atlantic salmon to survive. And then finally, the fourth reason is the building of dams. So we build dams to generate power and harness the power of water, but that creates a barrier that prevents our Atlantic salmon from going upstream and laying their eggs, because that's what they do. They're adults in Lake Ontario, they swim up to small streams and rivers to lay their eggs. They grow in the streams and rivers for a number of years, probably 4 to 8 years, travel back to Lake Ontario, and continue growing to become adults, and they're going to make that trip all over again. So those are the 4 main reasons that contributed to the Lake Ontario Atlantic salmon becoming extirpated from Lake Ontario. So it's all those things at once. Now, like I said, this happened over 100 years ago, and at that time, the people knew that this was happening. They saw that the species were declining, and they tried to repopulate them. They tried to breed them in captivity and release those eggs and fry into the wild. But 100 years ago, it didn't work. And the reason for that was all that pressure on the aquatic ecosystem, the pollution, the dams, the deforestation. The habitat just wasn't good enough to support the Atlantic salmon. So since then, a lot of work has been done to improve that habitat and make it suitable for our Atlantic salmon to survive and grow and become adults and eventually repopulate the species. So Atlantic salmon are considered a species at risk, and here at the Toronto Zoo we work with a few different native species at risk. And a species at risk is a species that is designated as special concern, threatened, endangered, or extirpated. And basically, each of those classifications means that there are certain protections and actions going on to support that species and prevent it from going extinct. So we are actually going to check out our Blanding's turtle room, where they are another species at risk here in Ontario. We're going to check that out, take a look at them, and just talk a little bit more about that species that the zoo is also working to protect. All right, and welcome to our Blanding's turtle room. So this is a different area of the zoo where we have some different species, but it is also where we keep our juvenile Blanding's turtles. They are an endangered species that we work with, and it's a head starting program. So the Blanding's turtles, the little babies, are raised here at the zoo, and then they're released back into the wild. So the Blanding's turtles in this room were actually hatched in 2020, so they're about 2 years old, and they're going to be going out into the wild in probably June. So not too much longer for them. So actually, helping me out here on the camera is my colleague Lisa. She works on the Blanding's Turtle project, and she can tell you just a little bit more about it while we check them out here.
Yeah, so here we have the Head Start Blanding's turtles, and pretty much the program, the point is to bring back the Blanding's turtle population in the Rouge National Urban Park because the numbers were quite low. And how we do that is we collect eggs from a stable population source, and then we raise them here at the zoo. The eggs incubate, and they hatch here, and then we put them in tanks like these ones, and they get fed 3 times a week. Turtles are omnivores, so they eat both meat and vegetation, and we clean their tanks as well and make sure they have a nice healthy life here for 2 years until we release them again in the wild. And then this is to hopefully ensure that they're bigger when they're released in the wild. So, you know, normally when they come out of an egg, they're quite small little hatchlings, and this is easier for predators to get them. So the Head Start program gives them a head start at life. So they're a bit bigger and hopefully more capable of surviving in the wild.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about Blanding's turtles, and one way you can tell a Blanding's turtle if you see one, is that yellow under their chin. So some species, they sort of change color as they grow and get older, but Blanding's turtles have that yellow chin the whole time. So if you ever see a turtle with that bright yellow chin, you know it's a Blanding's turtle. And our Blandings turtle program, just as Lisa explained, is very similar to our Atlantic salmon program, where we're taking eggs and we're raising them and giving them that head start in life. We're doing the same thing with our Atlantic salmon, because the reality is that out in the wild, so few of those eggs would survive and so few of those juveniles would survive. So this helps them grow a bit and gives them a better chance when they're out in the wild, for both our Blandings turtles and our Atlantic salmon. So that wraps it up for us here at the Toronto Zoo. I hope you've enjoyed your time with us and learned a little bit about our Atlantic salmon program and our Blandings turtle program. So enjoy the rest of the program, and we'll see you later.
These 4 reasons, deforestation, dams, overfishing, and pollution, all combined to cause the extirpation of Atlantic salmon from Lake Ontario by 1898. Overarching, over top of these 4 reasons though, is a larger problem, and that was a lack of connection, understanding, and care that many of the European settlers had for the natural world. There is still so much beauty and health in this world though, and if we humans deepen our connection and our understanding, we can care for the natural world better, avoid stories like the loss of Atlantic salmon in the future, and even reverse some of the damage that has already been done.
There are many things that you can do at home to protect species at risk and prevent future human-caused extinctions. And the first step is to learn about species at risk in your area and globally. And there are a lot of really great resources online to learn about species at risk. So if you want to learn about species at risk in Ontario, the Government of Ontario website is a really great resource for information. And by learning about how important individual creatures are, people will learn to care for them and begin to advocate for their protection. To protect local species at risk, you can start by making your home more wildlife friendly. And one way to do this is to put up stickers, posters, and other decorations in your windows to prevent bird collisions, as birds often mistake the reflections in windows as open space where they can fly. And another way that you can protect local species at risk is to plant native pollinator gardens, as these provide habitat, food, and shelter for native pollinators and other wildlife. There are so many other actions that you can take to protect species at risk around the world, including recycling and purchasing sustainable products to protect critical habitat, and even slowing down when driving to prevent wildlife collisions. And if you want to do more, you can even reach out to your local environmental organization to see if there are any ways that you can help. And by taking part in these actions, you can really deepen your connection to and understanding of nature.
Hello everyone. Thanks for checking out this week's segment of Fishy Facts. I'm Johnny Nene. This week, we're going to look at a native fish species called the Redside Dace. Redside Dace are a cool water minnow species. In Canada, they're only found in Ontario in streams that flow into Lake Simcoe, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and the western part of Lake Ontario. As their name suggests, Redside Dace have a bright red stripe that runs about halfway down their body, along with a thinner, bright yellow stripe that extends to the tail. They can reach lengths of about 12 centimeters long, and they have large mouths with protruding jaws that they use to help them catch insects from above the water's surface. Redside dace are found in clear, cool, flowing waters with varying substrates, including silt, gravel, or stone. They are generally found in areas with overhanging grasses and shrubs. Redside dace eat insects, and they have a super cool way for catching their prey. They can leap up to 10 centimeters out of the water to catch insects that are flying above the water's surface, and they are the only fish in Canada with this unique ability. During spawning, Redside dace will use the nests that are constructed by other fish species like common shiner and creek chub, and they rely on these species to guard their nest and eggs. Redside dace are incredibly sensitive to habitat disturbances, and they are considered an indicator species. The term indicator species means that the status of a particular species reflects the changes or conditions in an ecosystem. Redside dace are listed as endangered in Canada, and they are protected under the Species at Risk Act and Ontario's Endangered Species Act. Under the Endangered Species Act, a recovery strategy must be prepared for species that are listed as threatened or endangered, and one was prepared for the Redside dace back in 2010. Threats to Redside dace populations are mainly from urban development and include pollutants from stormwater and agricultural runoff, habitat fragmentation caused by dams, and habitat degradation from artificial channelization and the removal of riparian vegetation. Currently, there are conservation efforts being carried out to try to help the Redside dace, including captive breeding by the University of Windsor and habitat restoration initiatives by Ontario streams and conservation authorities. However, as most populations of Redside dace are currently surrounded by urban development and will likely continue to be developed, the future of this unique fish is anything but certain. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about the Redside dace and that you can take away just how important it is to have quality habitat for our species. Thanks for checking out this week's segment of Fishy Facts. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks again, Mary Kate, Elizabeth, and Johnny. In our next episode, we're going to be learning about how, with our deepening connection, understanding, and care, we are restoring, bringing back Atlantic salmon to Lake Ontario. Until then, keep on swimming upstream.